Well, good morning, everyone. It is so good to see you this Thursday morning. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us for daily devotions through Redeeming Life Fellowship. I've got my coffee ready, and we're going to dive right into Luke chapter 14, verses 1 through 14. And we're going to be actually touching on two issues, two subjects that happen in the same episode, where Jesus is at the house of a prominent Pharisee. And as Jesus is getting closer and closer to Jerusalem, the tension that's building up in anticipation of his passion is getting tighter and tighter. And so Jesus is becoming more of a figure who's looming large and being arresting people's attention, and people are paying a closer eye, a closer watch on Jesus and his work and his ministry and his words, his ministry, his authority. The eyes are on Jesus, and not so much eyes on him because they want to follow him, but eyes on him because they're ready to criticize him and to try and undercut him and to try and trip him up in his words, or to find some egregious fault in him so that they can put Jesus in his proper place. And so there's a lot of this still contesting of authority and pride of place that's happening right before our very eyes as we're seeing Jesus do his ministry, where some people are receiving what Jesus has to say and others who in their proud hearts are resisting. And I think a passage like this is one where there's a lot of resisting that's going on, and resisting for various reasons. But one of them has to do with the issue of the Sabbath and obeying the Sabbath, which is something that, frankly, we as Christians really don't talk that much about. And I think we would be encouraged, blessed, that even it's important that we actually clarify our thinking and our convictions on how it is that we as Christians obey the Sabbath. But then another one that just has to do with the way it is that we treat people. And Jesus, in these two episodes, he actually, when I read it and hear it, sounds a lot like Pastor Jesse, who I love him so dearly. He has a way, unlike me, I have to talk a lot to be able to just say something simply. Jesse has a way of just, of just cutting through the quick, cutting through the riffraff, and just getting it to the heart of the matter. I love that about Pastor Jesse. Here in this scenario, this situation, Jesus is really getting to the heart of the matter, and that helps us because what we're about to read does make it actually that the plain sense and the application of what he has to say is actually pretty simple. And so let's just read together these 14 verses. Some days like these in our devotions, we actually have shorter passages, only 14 verses today. So I think y'all can handle it. But I'm going to take a sip of coffee and let's continue. To preface what we're about to read, and I think Pastor Jesse's probably touched on this once or twice, that what the issue that's at hand, where Jesus is eating at the prominent house of a prominent Pharisee, and there comes this question whether or not it's lawful to heal on the Sabbath. And this stretches way back into the book of Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 10. Actually, maybe even a little longer than that, but I digress. Where God commands the Israelites to honor the Sabbath day, that's the last day of the week, and to keep it holy. And where it says, for 6 days you shall work, and on the seventh you will not work. Neither you, nor your family, nor your ox, or your donkey, your manservant, your maidservant. For God worked the 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested, and he made it holy. That's the paraphrase of that entire section. And so there leads this question, is to say, if we're supposed to honor the Sabbath, to work 6 days and not work on the seventh, that calls into question, what is it that's work? What constitutes work? And however it is that you constitute or understand the nature of work is going to determine whether or not it's lawful to do that on the Sabbath day or not. And this, as we know from extra biblical literature, is a fiercely debated topic in first century Judaism. What is work? And how is it that we're going to honor the Sabbath day on this? And if nothing else, I want this idea to become clear in your mind. That the importance of the Sabbath, among many other things, is to remind us that our time belongs to God. And apart from the Sabbath, it could be very easy to be able to say, to regard our time as our own. And that when we feel as though our time is being taken away from us, that it's like something's being stolen from us. And we've lost time, precious, valuable time, wasted on something else. But what we have in the Sabbath is a reminder, an enduring memorial reminder for each and every one of us that time itself belongs to God. And that's important for all of us. But it's also easy to take a legalistic spirit towards that honoring the Sabbath, that when, as you're honoring the Sabbath, that your eyes will actually be blinded to the good things that God would actually call us to do. I think Matthew actually summarizes it well, where he says, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Is it lawful to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? And Jesus is going to help us get to the heart of that issue that we're going to be reading here. So let's read this. Luke chapter 14. It says, one Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. There in front of him was a man suffering from dropsy. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they remained silent. So taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him away. And here he gets to the crux of the matter. Verse 5, then he asked them, if one of you has a son or an ox that falls into a well on a Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull him out? And they had nothing to say. So Jesus does get at the heart of the matter, where apart from adopting a legalistic attitude to the Sabbath, it's important that we don't let even something as important as honoring the Sabbath be the sort of thing that interferes with God's call upon our lives to be able to do right, to do justice, to save and to rescue the moment when rescue and saving is needed. This would be, as Jesus would say elsewhere, paying attention to the weightier matters of the law. And that's something that I think is absolutely critical for us to remember. But with that, let's continue and follow where Jesus, in this next moment, is so interesting because he sees the way in which that the situation has unfolded around him. And he looks at it, and it's like an opportunity has sort of presented itself before him, and he's using it as an opportunity, as a teaching moment for everybody else who's here. Because remember, Jesus is sitting in the house of a prominent Pharisee, and if people are in the house of a prominent Pharisee, you know that there's going to be people who are coming, if they're invited, that they grant themselves, thinking themselves very special. Oh, I got invited to the house of a prominent Pharisee. And that once you're in, you want to try and work your very hardest to be able to get closest to the person who has the most authority, the most influence, who's the most popular, so that you can get into their circle and be regarded as someone who's also equally important and popular because you've gotten into their inner circle. And this has all been happening, and even Jesus has somehow been, gotten into the inner circle. And all of this is setting itself up, as it were, to illustrate something that's happening before their very eyes that is a teaching moment for everybody who's involved, including this prominent Pharisee. So let's read. It says, verse 7, when he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the places of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give this man your seat. Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all your fellow guests. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Now, mind you, this is not Jesus offering an in to be working the pedals and metals of reverse psychology that says, if you want to get up to be in the highest place, go to the bottom so that you eventually get to the highest place. And don't go to the highest place ever, because then you're just going to be in the bottom and nobody wants to be there. This isn't the way that Jesus is working, but showing basically the divine paradox, that how it is that God, in his wisdom and in his grace and in his mercy towards the people who are underserving, takes the lowly and exalts them. And he takes the exalted and he humbles them. That's the way Jesus works, so that all of us, or I should rather, that none of us would think more highly of us than we really ought. But here's also the important part, or one of the important parts, where what Jesus is describing is one that really functions in practical parabolic advice. Is Jesus really offering just practical advice about things that you ought to do or not ought to do when you're invited to an important person's party? Yes, but I think it's more than that. And it's Luke tips this hand, or suggests this much, when he says that this whole thing is a parable, where there's a veiled meaning that's going on beyond the surface, and that is that the picture of this wedding feast is probably one that has its application to the kingdom of God, in that it's not that within God's economy about who's high and who's low, it doesn't work that people who are at the highest are the ones who have climbed over others to get to the top. That's not the way the kingdom of God works. And that what you see here happening in a very practical sense is the same sort of thing that actually happens in God's kingdom, in God's economy, in the way that he exalts the humble and he humbles the exalted. But then, lastly, verse 12. Then Jesus said to his host, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Now, it's important to remember, when Jesus says, do not invite or give a luncheon, do not invite your friends, brothers, relatives, or rich neighbors, what he means is that do not merely invite them. In other words, keep inviting the people within your circle who you recognize as those who can give you something back. And isn't that the way that we typically think about the nature of our friendships? It's an interesting matter. I remember being told this a long time ago from an evangelist who would, visit lots of churches as evangelists normally do, where he had quipped at one point where he said, when I hear that that churches that are self-described as friendly churches, what that typically means is that they're friendly towards people who are already in the church, where there's a warmth, a friendliness, a hospitality, a benevolent spirit that you're exercising towards people who are already in. So that, oh yes, we're very friendly. We're friendly towards people who are also very friendly. When they're friendly towards us, then it's so much easier to reciprocate that friendliness, and everybody is warm and happy and cozy. And that rarely does it ever mean that when you say that you're a friendly church, that means that you're actually friendly towards people who have no friendliness to offer back to you. In fact, they have nothing to offer back to you. As a matter of fact, they probably have much more needs than what your typical friend has. And so what Jesus is then saying is that when you're putting forth that deliberate effort, giving a dinner or a luncheon, bringing people into your circle, don't make it about bringing all the people in who can reciprocate the sort of generosity and hospitality that you've just given to them. It is so easy to want to be friends with those who are friendly, to offer things to people who you know that can give you something back. Much more difficult is it to be able to offer hospitality and warmth and generosity and mercy and grace towards people who are the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, the people who just have more needs than you do and don't have anything to offer. And Jesus says, that with this, that you will be repaid eventually, but you have to put those things off and trust that being repaid, giving with something without getting anything in return, is something that you can trust to the hands of God. And you know why we can trust this to the hands of God is because this kind of warmth, hospitality, offering something to somebody else who had nothing else to offer back to you, that's exactly the way God has treated us. He was the one who first saw us when we were crippled, poor, blind, and lame, and said, I'm going to offer myself. I'm going to love you. I'm going to show you grace. I'm going to show you mercy. Even though that you were undeserving and you had nothing else to offer back, I'm going to do this just because I love you. That this is the way it is that God has treated us. And so this is the way in which that we love and extend grace and mercy is supposed to be an absolute reflection, an outpouring of rather an overflow of the grace and the mercy that God has shown us. And so that, I think, shows us enough about what we should do, how we should conduct ourselves as we continue to open up our hearts and our lives to those around us, even around a dinner table, as Luke continues to bring us back to again and again. And a message like this is also going to be very important for the parable that you're about to read in tomorrow's passage, but we won't get to that yet. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, we have the podcast you can also listen to. And I can't wait till we get to meet each other in person, to talk, to live, to grow in the joy of the Lord as he continues to bring about his purposes in and through us here in Columbia City. So God bless you, take care, and I will see you next time.